So, ladies and gentlemen, community leaders, officials, academics, guest speakers, panelists, distinguished participants, I'd like to warmly welcome you all to today's event seminar entitled Anti-terrorism Legislation, Its Problem Areas and Consequences, which is being held here at the main city center campus of the University of Helsinki. This seminar is a joint effort of the Erik Castrén Institute of International Law and Human Rights, a center for research and studies within the Faculty of Law in the University of Helsinki, and the Label the Terrorist Network, a human rights network formed during the autumn of 2014 by entities within the Muslim community in Finland. The network aims to speak against the labeling of Muslims in the media in Finland and society at large. It also participates in the discussion on legislation and policy making here in Finland. My name is Hundar Rasafa, and I currently act as the spokesperson for the network, and I'll also be your host for today. On October 9 and 10, 2014, the Helsinki District Court ordered 4 Finnish men to be arrested on suspicion of having committed terrorist acts. Out of the various crimes that they were suspected of, murder committed with terrorist intent was the most severe. Subsequently, Dr. Martin Scheinin, our keynote speaker for today, wrote an article in his blog in which he highlighted certain aspects related to the interpretation of anti-terrorism legislation in Finland. Now, I'm not going to elaborate more on this, firstly because I'm in no position to do so, but also because we'll be having the privilege and honor of listening to the keynote speaker, Dr. Martin Scheinin, speak in just a few short moments. The so-called war on terror has led to many countries adopting increasingly harsher anti-terrorism legislation. In this regard, the United Kingdom has probably taken some of the most earnest and some would say troubling steps. And we have speakers here today who will highlight more on the British experience. At the end of this seminar, we also have an interesting panel discussion. Amongst the panelists are community leaders, academics, experts, and also officials. And the panel will be moderated by Dr. Reetta Toivanen, Adjunct Professor for Social and Cultural Anthropology, and a Finnish Academy Research Fellow at the University of Helsinki at the Erik Castrén Institute. We hope that the audience will actively participate in the seminar by asking relevant questions related to the topic, and ask those from the guest speakers and panelists. There will be time for that. At this point, I'll also remind and request everybody to switch off their mobile phones or at least put them on silence so as to not disturb the proceedings. I'd like to also point out that, as was mentioned in the invitations and the posters of the seminar is being recorded and also broadcast live on the internet, so I'd like to welcome our online audience as well to the seminar. Finally, on behalf of the Label the Terrorist Network, I'd like to express our utmost gratitude to the University of Helsinki and also the Erik Castrén, especially the Erik Castrén Institute of International Law and Human Rights, for cooperating with us in the organizing of this event. A special thank you also goes to the guest speakers and panelists who took time out of their hectic and busy schedules to come here today. Now, to the first speech of the day, which is Dr. Martin Scheinin's keynote speech. Mr. Scheinin has been Professor of Public International Law and Human Rights at the European University Institute since 2008. In 2005, he was appointed as the first United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and counter-terrorism, a position of trust he held until July 2011. Currently, he leads an EU-funded research project called Surveil that analyzes ethical issues, legal limitations, and efficiency of surveillance. His speech today is entitled, "Who is a Terrorist? What is Wrong with Finnish Law?" So without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Martin Scheinin to come here to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to see such a big audience on a Saturday afternoon. and also that obviously within this audience we have a lot of expertise and experience, including in issues about labeling, stigmatization, and problems encountered also here within Finnish society by those who may be immigrants or who otherwise may be under a critical eye or suspicion, sometimes also from the side of authorities. I'm going to present the issue of definitions of terrorism, definitions of terrorist crimes in Finnish legislation with a critical view. Basically, I'm going to explain what's wrong with Finnish law in this matter of utmost importance. Finland has a criminal code or penal code from 1889, from the times where the Finnish nation emerged within the Russian Empire as an autonomous Grand Duchy. Finland had its own legislature and enacted its own internal laws, including the criminal code of 1889. And for most of the time, since then, for 114 years, Finland survived without the notion of terrorism in its criminal code. It was only the terrorist attacks of 9/11/2001 and the subsequent EU framework decision on combating terrorism that resulted in an EU-level obligation for Finland to introduce the category of terrorist crimes. The EU, for instance, requires aggravated penalties for crimes which are committed as defined, when defined as terrorist crimes. And I'm describing the process that followed from 9/11 and the EU framework decision as panic, but as we are in Finland, panic in slow motion. The snow is already gone, but one could also speak of a snowball that gradually builds up on the concept of terrorism, and new crimes are inserted into the criminal code in order to, so to say, make the fight against terrorism more effective. The criminal provisions seek to cover broader and broader phenomena which surround the actual core of terrorism. Much of what countries did after 9/11 was done in panic. Quite often it was a political response to media attention, where politicians felt that we must do something, we must be seen doing something, and what we can do is to introduce new criminalizations. And many things have gone wrong in that process of panic in slow motion. In Finland, we got a new chapter 34A on terrorist crimes, which was inserted into the penal code in 2003. And basically, the EU solution was a clever and sound one, namely not to introduce as such a crime of terrorism. We have very bad experiences from other parts of the world where we have circular definitions of terrorism which may carry then the death penalty. And terrorism is simply defined by referring to the word terror itself. That doesn't work. The EU sought a better solution, which was pre-existing ordinary crimes are listed, and when they are coupled with a particular intent called terrorist intent, then they become terrorist crimes. And they may, for instance, result in aggravated penalties because of their labeling as terrorist crimes. But it's not a new crime. The crimes as such are pre-existing crimes. It's only the additional element of terrorist intent which then qualifies them as terrorist crimes. So that is the good news in this presentation, that there is a solid core in the construction of the EU framework decision and subsequently also the Finnish penal code, it's chapter 34A, namely that it's only pre-existing crimes that can be labeled as terrorist crimes. Unfortunately, the good news ends there, and then we have a lot of problems. Firstly, as in the EU framework decision, the list of pre-existing crimes is far too long, properly to capture the notion of terrorism. It was mentioned that I served 6 years as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Counter-terrorism, and during that time much of my work was related to definitions of terrorism, and I was working towards the model definition of terrorism and presented it in my last report as Special Rapporteur as a collection of best practice in countering terrorism, and one of the elements of best practice was a model definition of terrorism. So one problem here now in the Finnish model, the EU model, is that the list of ordinary crimes which may be qualified as terrorist crimes is far too long. And I have taken just 2 examples to demonstrate this. Aggravated theft for temporary use directed against a motor vehicle. So what's called stealing a car may be a terrorist crime. And also so-called aggravated invasion of public premises. So making unlawful entry into public premises is invasion of public premises, and it becomes aggravated when it's directed against a government building or the parliament or an embassy. But it doesn't necessarily require extremely violent means, which is typical for proper definitions of terrorism. It's simply unlawful entry becomes aggravated invasion of public premises when it's directed against certain public premises, such as a government building. That was problem 1. Problem number 2 is that terrorist intent is also defined far too broadly. That's section 6 of chapter 34a, and I'll show you what it contains. It contains 4 alternative intents which all may qualify a crime as a terrorist crime, an ordinary crime such as the theft of a motor vehicle. When they are committed for these purposes, then they become terrorist crimes. And only the 2 first ones are okay. The first 2 ones are terrorist intents, which are also included in what I saw as a model definition of terrorism. And I'm not the source of that model definition. It comes from the Terrorist Financing Convention of 1999, from Security Council Resolution 1566, and many other important international instruments against terrorism, where we have the 2 alternative intents, either to cause fear amongst the general population, that is to terrorize the general population, or to compel a government or international organization to do something or refrain from something. So those are the 2 universally accepted intent elements in terrorism, and also covered by what I see as a model definition. Unfortunately, the EU wanted to go further, and there's the 3rd element: unlawfully overturn or amend the constitution of a state, or seriously destabilize the legal order of a state, or cause particularly, there must be the word missing, particularly grievous harm to the state economy or the fundamental social structures of the state. Please note that this is not only about Finland. This is also about, let's say, Russia or Syria. A person who here wants to destabilize the constitutional order, the dictatorial constitutional order in another country, and therefore commits a crime, such as the theft of a motor vehicle, could be committing a terrorist crime. And then we have the 4th one: cause particularly extensive harm to the finances or other fundamental structures of an international organization. The problem here is the financial dimension. When I work with definitions of terrorism as United Nations Special Rapporteur, always I try to say that there must be an element of serious violence against human beings. And therefore financial issues, structural issues, constitutional issues should not be covered by the crime of terrorism, because you should start and end with serious violence against human beings. And a very handy, like layman's definition is, terrorism is sacrificing the lives of innocent bystanders. Innocent bystander notion is not a legal notion, but it gives you an understanding that it is your what's evil in terrorism is reducing ordinary people to mere means to serve your aims. You are sacrificing human beings usually killing or maiming them, subjecting them to very serious violence, to words compelling the government, or simply to create fear amongst the population. That is terrorism properly defined, and we have now the two problems: too long a list of crimes and too long a list of aims or intent elements. Here's a short version of what I see as the model definition. There's first the deadly or otherwise serious physical violence against members of the general population or segments of it, including the taking of hostages. Hostage taking as such may not have yet resulted in serious physical violence, but there's a threat of killing the hostage, and that's why it's universally covered in terrorism definitions. And the intent, either to create fear or to compel the government. And thirdly, the requirement of legality as defined in existing international instruments against terrorism or properly crafted national legislation which meets all elements of the requirement of legality in criminal law. So that would be a model definition, and you see that in the EU approach and the Finnish approach, the list of crimes is much longer than item 1, and the list of intents is much longer than item 2. Those were the two first problems. The third problem is there are a lot of accessory crimes built around the first crime, the crime with the terrorist intent, which is an ordinary crime carried out for those purposes. Then we have additional crimes. Preparation of a terrorist act. Usually crimes are punishable when they have reached the level of an attempt. But in terrorism and some other crimes, already preparation will constitute a separate crime. Provision of training to terrorism, receiving training for terrorism, recruitment to terrorism, financing of terrorism, and financing a terrorist group are all then separate crimes. So we get further down the drain or towards a bigger and bigger snowball by adding these accessory crimes to the already quite long list of ordinary crimes that may be terrorist crimes. You may think it's strange to have both financing of terrorism and financing a terrorist group there. Well, financing of terrorism used to be a fairly narrow crime because it was directed only to financing certain forms of international terrorism as defined in international treaties against terrorism. But now it has been expanded to cover also any crime in Section 1, any terrorist crime. And then financing a terrorist group is an addition because there you don't need any crime. The existence of a terrorist group is sufficient to make financing of that group an offense, even when the group has not committed a single act of terrorism. So that's why we have the two separate crimes. Section 6 is the provision which defines what is a terrorist group under Finnish law, and this could be seen as the fourth problem. Because a terrorist group is a structured group of at least 3 persons established over a period of time, acting in concert in order to commit offences referred to in Section 1. So this is directed towards the future. Usually crimes are about what the person has already done. But this crime is based on a presumed intent in the future to commit acts of terrorism. And if you are 3 people collaborating towards that end, you are already guilty of the offense of organizing a terrorist group. It is the prosecutor who needs to prove to a court so that the court is convinced that this group exists and that they have this kind of an intention in the future to carry out acts of terrorism. It doesn't need hard evidence. It's based on sufficient connections between the individuals, perhaps their email correspondence or something else, which demonstrates to the prosecutor and then to the court that there indeed is an intention to carry out acts of terrorism in the future. No requirement that any member of this group or the group as a whole has ever committed a single terrorist offense. It's sufficient that you are organized as a group. And of course, terrorist groups are not registered associations or corporations. They are just associations between people. They don't carry membership cards. They don't have statutes which would be registered with an authority. It's simply one form of, one could say, crime by association. You are too much in contact with the wrong people, and then you together with them become a terrorist organization. That was problem number 4. Then we have problem number 5, which relates to the issue of the so-called foreign fighters. People leaving Finland to participate in an armed conflict somewhere else, let's say Syria or Iraq. Whether they are terrorists and whether they are committing acts of terrorism by joining in the fight elsewhere. As you know, there's a pending case of which we know very little, but I have issued some critical comments in public in Perustuslaki-blogi, the Constitution blog, on the basis of press reports from that case, which to me suggest that there necessarily doesn't have to be any form of terrorism involved if persons leave Finland to join an armed conflict elsewhere. Because these people may be terrorists, that's the third option here. If their acts elsewhere constitute acts of terrorism as properly defined, then they would be terrorists also when they travel from Finland. So if somebody goes from Finland, let's say to Syria, to commit acts of violence against innocent bystanders, blowing up buses or kindergartens or schools, that would be terrorism also when committed elsewhere. But there are the 3 other options. First option is that they are engaged in lawful acts of war as combatants. That refers to so-called international armed conflict, which is an armed conflict between 2 or more states. Then we speak of war in conventional terms, and we have what's called combatant immunity. The soldiers are not to be punished for the mere fact that they fight in a war, even if they kill soldiers of the opposing party. If they kill civilians, that's a completely different case. But if they direct the violence against combatants of the other warring party and fight with lawful means, not using illegal weapons, then they are lawful combatants and protected by combatant immunity, meaning they are not committing any crime. The second option relates to non-international armed conflict, usually referred to as civil war. There, the government in which country the civil war takes place treats the combatants of the opposing non-state actor as criminals, because they are killing soldiers of the state army. But other states and the international community do not. For Finland, for instance, it should not be a crime that somebody joins a civil war to fight on this or that side. Again, if they direct their violence only against soldiers of the opposing party. But if they kill civilians, it's a different story. Fourth option is people joining a fight elsewhere may be perpetrating other international crimes, such as war crimes, crimes against humanity, even genocide. And that would be the scenario of committing violence against civilians instead of simply the soldiers of the opposing party. And to me, on the basis of the public press reports, it looks like the prosecutor has too easily resorted to the third option, that people leaving Finland to fight elsewhere would be, as foreign fighters, engaged in acts of terrorism. Not by definition, and in most cases not. For instance, the force situation, other international crimes, is much more likely for use of unlawful weapons or for targeting civilians than that they would be properly defined terrorism. I believe there is a new wave of counter-terrorism legislation in the pipeline in Finland, based on UN Security Council Resolution 2178, the Foreign Fighters Resolution, which requires states to criminalize people going abroad, getting training, and then participating in acts of terrorism. But that resolution is carefully worded so that it's not simply the foreign fighting which becomes a form of terrorism. It is committing acts of terrorism outside the country. And so it should be also for purposes of Finnish law and in Finland. I do not know the facts of the case that exists, but what I saw in the public domain was suspicion of participation in murder with a terrorist intent committed abroad during a long period of time, which to me suggests simply participating in armed conflict, which would not be a terrorist crime, properly speaking. We are speaking all the time of the Penal Code of Finland, and that applies also to crimes committed abroad when we speak of a person who is a Finnish citizen or permanent resident. Their actions are punishable also when they return to Finland. They may be crimes also there, and if the people are tried and punished there, then Finland should not have a second trial in relation to the same acts, but if they escape trial and punishment elsewhere, they can be tried in Finland. Also, other foreigners may be tried under Finnish law in Finland for crimes committed abroad, but that's restricted to certain forms of international crimes. It's much less general than the situation of Finnish nationals or permanent residents. Killing in the course of armed conflict is not necessarily any crime under international law, and when Chapter 34A, Section 1 lists killing, homicide, murder as potential terrorist crimes, one should be careful not to extend it to fighting in a foreign country, because it's really only those situations not covered by the three other alternatives, which would be, properly speaking, terrorism, and in many cases, in the conduct of armed hostilities, those acts do not constitute any crimes. If we deal with crimes against humanity, war crimes, or genocide, then the terrorism chapter of Finnish Penal Code should not apply at all. We have a separate chapter, Chapter 11, on international crimes, and they would be punishable under those provisions rather than the terrorism chapter. Finally, we have the issue of not only crimes but administrative sanctions against terrorists. These are serious matters because people may be for a decade or even longer deprived of access to their bank accounts, deprived of making any financial transactions, including being employed, doing work against salary, and deprived of travel because of the cancellation of their passports. The freezing of assets, the prohibition against financial transactions, and the travel ban, they all flow from the UN Security Council measure of listing individuals as terrorists. There used to be a 1267 list of Al-Qaeda and Taliban terrorists, persons associated with either Al-Qaeda or Taliban, but since 2011 they have been separated to resolutions 1989 and 1988, so there are two different regimes, but nevertheless both Al-Qaeda and Taliban listed individuals continue to be subject to those sanctions. It is a United Nations Security Council decision which lists individuals by name, and then the EU implements it through a council regulation which has direct effect in Finland. So no Finnish law is enacted. No Finnish authority needs to be involved in listing the individuals because that has already been done by the UN Security Council. It's only the Finnish banks which will then implement the measure and prevent the person from accessing his or her bank accounts or receiving any transactions from anybody, including the employer. Because it's an administrative measure, or explained as an administrative measure, there is no trial and no court. At EU level, there have been efforts, and the most famous case is the case of Mr. Qadi, a Saudi Arabian businessman, to question the legality of the EU level implementation of the UN list. And indeed, the EU Court of Justice decided that the EU Council had not had sufficient information, evidence to justify the sanctions within the legal order of the EU. So the EU should have insisted in getting more information from the UN. In fact, the UN doesn't have it either. Nobody reviews the lawfulness of the UN Security Council listing, but the EU court was willing to review the EU level implementation, the consequences. At the UN level, so far we have only a delisting ombudsperson who can receive an application from an individual to become delisted, and then there is a long and complicated procedure which so far in most cases has resulted in the delisting of the individual. But it is subject to a cumbersome procedure and ultimately the tacit approval by the political body, the Security Council, which always could block the delisting. So what we have is, since 9/11, roughly, we have hundreds of individuals on these two lists who are blocked from financial transactions and blocked from international travel. And this is completely separate from the earlier dimensions which all relate to the Finnish penal code. I think I will stop here and give room for the other speakers. This was meant as a critical introduction to the problems in Finnish legislation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Scheinin. I think at this point there is a couple of minutes to give the floor for questions if anybody has questions. So there are microphones passing around, and if somebody has a question, then yes, sir, here. If your voice is loud enough, then I guess you can speak without a microphone as well.
It is loud enough. Professor Scheinin, as a UN rapporteur, did you come across with mercenarism? And is that clearly different from terrorism?
I had no direct involvement in issues of mercenaries. My answer would be quite simple, that it does not matter whether a person is a civilian, a soldier, non-state actor, mercenary. What matters is the acts themselves. That if you subject innocent bystanders, such as a bus or a school, to deadly violence, then you're a terrorist. Required that you are trying to compel the government or creating fear amongst the general population. Usually, at least the latter is easy to show. That why would you target innocent bystanders if you didn't really intend simply to create fear amongst the general population? So mercenaries very well can commit acts of terrorism, but mercenarism is not a form of terrorism on its own. Again, mercenaries, if they fight against the regular army, wear uniforms, they are not combating a crime, they are participating as active participants in armed conflict.
Thank you very much. I think there's a question in the back there. Please state your name also.
Yes, Rami Adhan, Syrian, living in Finland for 27 years. Just want to thank you for the valuable lecture. You've talked pretty much about individual terrorism, but I do not really recall you mentioned anything about state terrorism. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I was implied in my previous answer to Professor Scheinin that, again, it doesn't matter whether you're a state actor or non-state actor. It depends what you are actually doing. And certainly there have been incidents where a state has been actively involved in an act of terrorism, such as downing a civilian airplane. if a state does that directly by shooting down a plane or by financing individual terrorists who take down an airplane, then those state actors are also involved in acts of terrorism. No problem. I don't entertain the notion of a terrorist state because that's a way of essentializing, like one act of terrorism makes the same state for all purposes and for eternity as a terrorist state. I think we should also here speak of individual acts, but states can very well be involved in acts of terrorism. Yes.
Yes.
Excuse me, just wanted to say, would you consider 1 million Iraqi dead as an act of terrorism?
It's not a question of numbers. Million Iraqi dead could be a crime against humanity. I think it's more likely that it would be constituted a crime against humanity as a massive and systematic attack against the civilian population. But there could be cases where it's also is an act of terrorism or includes acts of terrorism.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, Professor Scheinin. My name is Anna Sekular, and I'm a law student here at the University of Helsinki. And I was just wondering about the sanctions you brought up and the sanctions lists. As I understand it, the banks and the private sector are really having difficulties in identifying the money transfers and the money flows that are actually going to the terrorist groups and so on. So how do you have any idea, or how would you suggest that the Finnish government or the Finnish legislation should be improved in that perspective?
I think the problems are factual, and I don't think legislation can do much in that field. It's just better cooperation, and there are, for instance, private services that you can buy, that there are investigative offices or private companies who will, so to say, prove financial transactions by checking every possible sanctions list there exists in the world in order to prevent transfers to an entity which is on one or the other list.
I think we have time for one quick question. And then it's possible to ask questions from Mr. Scheinin also during the panel discussion.
My name is Zaid Rashid. I have been living in Finland for 50 years. I'm researching in the church and the University of Helsinki. I am two Muslim leaders, founder of the Cine, the Muslim Council in Finland. I am without all the respect to you. I think I have been living 50 years in Finland. We have been living in peace. What's coming the new, the old, what you have has been done to speak about the Muslim, they're against the Muslims. I don't understand the thing, because we have kept it peace way, and we hope to be, and to with the future to be with it, because we think it's not only we, what's come to our new generation, because if we don't hold the peace, how we can be, and how Finland has been in peace after the Second World War, and after the independence of Finland. How you come today, the newspaper, why you don't? I have many times speak in many conferences about it. I think the problem is the problem of the media here in Finland, and our brothers, they are free about what's going on, and everyone is respecting the constitution and everything. I don't see what is your point of it, because if you put the law to us, how we can move? You are holding us in one very small pace.
Thank you very much.
No, I have finished. Sorry,
okay.
Sorry. I have a right.
Yes.
No, okay. And there is the thing, because before you do the Finland law, we have to first to respect us and to ask to some of our leaders what we think of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree. This is a very important question, and certainly the media plays a big role in either stigmatizing people or in protecting people against stigmatization. And I think the other speakers will be in a better position to answer to you. I just want to make a very brief remark which is related to the crime of financing of terrorism, where Finland had its very first case, where now the court, the first instance, has convicted, I recall, 3 or 4 persons for financing of terrorism, and given them conditional prison sentences for collecting 3,000 euro and sending that money to Somalia. I cannot think of any other case where that would be news for the Washington Post in the US. Somebody drunk driving in Finland and getting a similar conditional sentence, would that be news for Washington Post? No. But when there's the notion of terrorism, there's an enormous stigma in that notion which makes these matters extremely serious, and also the role of the media. So I look forward to the other speakers and hope to learn from them. And the other.
We do have to go on, but you can save your question for the panel discussion. Thank you very much. That was a very poignant way to end your... our next speech is by Mr. Tasnime Akunjee, who's currently working at Waterford Solicitors. He's a solicitor specializing in terrorism law and has been involved in various terrorism-related legal issues since 2000 in the UK and internationally. He has also actively taken part in the public discussion on government policies and has given comments on international media such as in The Guardian, Sky News, and Al Jazeera. Mr. Akunjee will be delivering his speech on the evolution of UK terror laws and their implementation. I'll let him take the stage.
So, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity for me to speak here today. I think the last individual who spoke and asked a question, I think it's important to start on that there is quite a lot of strong emotion in the communities building up about this issue of terrorism, the media, and the policies of law and how to deal with them. The truth is that the power to change these things aren't in the hands of anyone on this stage. They're in your hands because you are the voting electorate. So in terms of how do we deal with these problems, we have to look at where to apply the right pressure on the right organisations in order to affect change. And that means understanding who is speaking, what power they have, and how to persuade them of carrying on or push them in a different direction. It is not to throw arguments and words at people who actually are not in a position to make those changes. But I'll start with my lecture, and that's, I think, interestingly, Professor Martin Scheinin spoke about Finland being in a state of slow motion panic. I'm here to speak about the experience in the UK, which was panic on steroids, frankly, when it comes to definitions. So we'll start with the definition. Here are 3 definitions of terrorism from the Oxford English Dictionary, the Cambridge Dictionary, and the Collins English Dictionary. They're all current definitions, and this actually highlights the problem with what is terrorism. The first one, the Oxford Dictionary, speaks about unauthorised use of violence. The Cambridge Dictionary talks about the threat of violence and violent actions. And the Collins English Dictionary talks about this notion of systematic use of violence and intimidation. Even within the English language and the definition within it, we don't actually have a comprehensive idea or categorisation of what terrorism in and of itself is. Now, the UK Parliament, when implementing or debating laws about terrorism back in 2000, started thinking about this subject. And frankly, Lord Lloyd, who was charged with going through definitions and coming up with one, says this about that experience. We must obviously do our best with the definition. However, having spent many hours looking at many different definitions, I can only conclude that there are great difficulties in finding a satisfactory definition. Indeed, I was unable to do so. And he also thought no one else will succeed. Moving on, Lord Carlisle, who's the independent reviewer of terrorism in the UK, similarly, unsurprisingly, he says, I have been unable to achieve what was not achieved by Lord Lloyd. Perhaps it's impossible to do so. Moving on, Walter Lacour. He looked at over 100 definitions of terrorism, and the only commonality there that he could find was the characteristics of violence and the threat of violence. And he opinions, yet terrorism is hardly the only enterprise involving violence and threat of violence. So does war, so does coercive diplomacy, and even a fight in the pub, which I understand is not unknown in Finland. The definition of terrorism in the UK evolved from the pre-9/11 situation and the post-9/11 situation. Remembering always that 9/11 was something that happened in America, not even in Europe, but apparently its tsunami of affected the legal structures across Europe and continues to do so. Interestingly, under the old law, which was the Prevention of Terrorism Act 1989, the definition is quite close actually to what the model definition of Professor Scheinin refers to in his earlier talk. The use of violence, there's no threat here, just the use of violence for political ends, includes the use of violence for the purpose of putting the public or a section of the public in fear. Now this is a pragmatic approach because it's a jury who decides as to whether violence was actually used for political ends or indeed whether a section of the public was put in fear. But now we'll move on to the rather more complicated current definition. See, there's a lot of bold writing there. This is the new definition under the 2000 Act, as it has been evolved through various different pieces of legislation over the last 15 years. It now means the use or threat of action. It's not violence now, it's action, which basically means, if you're not dead, pretty much anything. Designed to influence governments or international governmental organisations, to intimidate the public or a section of the public, and it's for political, religious, racial or ideological cause. And it involves, of course, violence against person, but also, interestingly, damage to property now, and also risk to health and safety, and also the disruption of electronic systems, which is effectively cover hacking. So the definition itself has not only been widened there, but in different sections of the same Act. Even the words are given greater scope and meaning. For example, sections 2 to 5 of the same Act speak of action now including action outside of the United Kingdom, not just within it. A reference to personal properties are a reference to personal property wherever situated, not just in the UK. The reference to the public includes the public of any other country, not just the UK, so anywhere. And the government also doesn't just mean UK government, it is now the governments anywhere. So we have this notion of anything done with any intent, anywhere, against anyone or anything might be terrorism, which is fine. So what are the new elements specifically introduced? Religion, race and ideology, that's new. Action instead of violence. Property. Property as the notion of something that, if damaged, is somehow in terror, which is conceptually interesting. Government as any government, and public as any public. This massively widens the scope of behaviours potentially falling within the purview of terrorism. So we look at now the evolution as it happened, and that's not the wrong way round. That's my view of the way that evolution is taking place. These are the acts in the UK as is covered. So they start in 2000, effectively, and end, well, they're ongoing, but the last active one is 2010. Pretty much every year there's been a new terrorism act since we started. Looking at the main headings of each of those acts, the Terrorism Act 2000 and post 9/11 one creates a new offence of inciting terrorism, effectively encouragement. It outlawed terrorist groups at the hands of the Home Secretary. A particular politician could now simply, off their own bat, declare that a group is a terrorist group. Created the new offences of what's known as Section 57 and 58 of having material likely to be of use to terrorists. Now, if you have a particular terrorist with bad teeth and you have a toothbrush and you give it to him, maybe you don't know he's a terrorist. That could, under the law, be constituted as an offence. It's a material likely to be of use to a terrorist. And it sounds ridiculous, but I'll show you examples of where similar things have actually happened. The 2001 Act then created a pernicious piece of legislation where it allowed the Home Secretary to indefinitely detain, without charge and without a trial, foreign nationals who were not proved of being involved in terrorism, merely suspected. On the mere suspicion or suspicion that someone's involved in terrorism, they were detained with no trial and no charge. These are the type of laws that are being layered on top of that Terrorism Act 2000. The Prevention of Terrorism Act 2005 created the idea of control orders, which was the ability to restrict activities. And when we say restrict activities, what we actually mean is home arrest. You know, literally stuck in a house without being able to move, no economic activity at all, almost no ability to meet with anyone without prior written consent of the Home Office. And this sort of restricted activities based upon mere suspicion that, of somebody involved not in terrorism, but in terrorist-related activity. Now, frankly, I still have no idea what that could potentially cover, because it could literally cover anything. And that even applied to people where there's no evidence, or not even sufficient evidence, to actually bring them under the criminal law. So effectively, people who haven't committed a crime but are suspected of being somehow related to terrorist activity could actually be kept under house arrest. And that exists still. Terrorism Act 2006 further took the law to a new height, where a word that is almost, I've never seen used in legislation before, anywhere, but I have seen used with reference to religion, was the idea of a offence of glorification of terrorism. The idea that if you simply say something that may be perceived as being positive towards a past, existing or future terrorist event, then you are in fact committing a crime yourself. So for example, if you're wearing a t-shirt with the Twin Towers on it, with smoke coming out, potentially that would be an offence. Terrorism Act 2008 amended the definition of terrorism again, bringing in a racial component to it, and it also created the offence of taking pictures of the armed forces or collecting information about the armed forces or police. So if somebody is taking photographs of police, maybe arguably brutality, that itself, that person could be arrested under the Terrorism Act 2008. So what did the academics say? Well, we've heard Martin Scheinin already, so we'll move on to something else. And that's Professor Clive Walker. University of Leeds is, he wrote a book which is a comprehensive study on the Terrorism Acts, and his opinion is it fails to meet all desired standards in all respects. It's a completely ludicrous piece of legislation. He goes on to say that there are rights which are probably breached, and this mechanism to ensure democratic accountability and constitutionalism are even more deficient. And this country has more terrorism legislation on its statute books than almost any other developed democracy. Professor David Anderson, QC, he is the independent review of terrorism legislation. He critically points out that even when they might otherwise be constituted lawful hostilities under international law, agreeing with them or joining with these sort of activities would fall within the purview of the terrorist legislation. He then spoke specifically, and this is important, about the risks that strong powers within the legislation could be used for purposes other than the suppression of terrorism as is generally understood. The definition is so broad as to criminalise certain acts carried out overseas that constitute lawful hostilities under international humanitarian law. Are they necessary? Is there this big threat that means that a country must have these sort of laws on its books? Well, Dame Stella Remington, she was the head of the domestic secret service called MI5 in the UK from 1992 to 1996. And she states down here that she's accused ministers of exploiting fears over terrorism to restrict civil liberties, adding to mounting criticism of the government's record on human rights. Specifically, she said, it would be better that the government recognised that there are risks rather than frightening people in order to be able to pass laws which restrict civil liberties, which is precisely one of the objects of terrorism, that we live in fear under a police state. In short, what she's saying is that the terrorist laws fulfil the ends of terrorists. they actually do a better job of scaring people than actual terrorists do themselves, and actually encourage terrorism in the end. The MI5 website, which is the Domestic Security Service website, that's a relevant section, but it's reproduced there on the side. For the most part, the actions of domestic extremists pose a threat to public order, but not to national security. We also look at the prevent strategy, which I understand one of the other speakers is going to be speaking about. And if we look at the other way around the bottom first, it says there, the government actually recognises this. The aspirations of Al-Qaeda and like-minded groups in this country have not been realised. They attract very low levels of support. There is no evidence that this support base is growing. So, why do we need this legislation? What's it there for, if there's no case being made for an actual threat? The legislation has actually been used in various different sectors, and this has been the UK experience. Against individuals, we have Walter Wolfgang, who's quite a famous individual, who was a refugee from Nazi Germany and was a Labour Party member. He attended the Labour Party conference, which was the government at the time in 2005, and he responded simply to this, where Jack Straw, who was the then Foreign Secretary, said a statement, "We're in Iraq for one reason only, to help the elected Iraqi government build a secure, democratic and stable nation." More on that comment later. Mr. Wolfgang himself responded simply, "Nonsense, it's a lie and you know it." He was immediately surrounded by security staff, ejected from the hall, and his pass revoked. When he tried to re-enter, he was stopped by police and detained using the Terrorism Act. Economic institutions. Land Banksy, which is the National Bank of Iceland, in a squabble between the UK and Iceland over securitisation of UK creditors' assets, our government, the UK government, froze the assets of Land Banksy in the UK in order to try and secure those interests of the UK creditors. The order was made under a power containing the Anti-terrorism Crime and Security Act, and Land Banksy, the national bank of another country, was listed as a prescribed regime alongside Al-Qaeda. She doesn't even wear a hijab. So there we go. Journalistic freedoms. Police in the UK, or particularly the Cleveland Police, and 5 other police authorities have used what's known as the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, or REPA for short, to try and discover the source, or the journalistic source of various stories. So, intrusion into journalistic freedoms. This is what the Terrorism Acts, and one of them, have been used for. Civil liberties under Schedule 7, which is particularly another pernicious piece of legislation. This allows the UK police to stop people without any suspicion at all at airports, international rail terminals and ports, and ask them various questions. There's no requirement of the police officer to actually believe that the person may be involved in terrorism. They can stop anyone they like, and you can be held at that port for up to 9 hours, and you must answer questions. You don't really have a choice. If you don't, then you are committing an offence which would leave you liable to 3 months in prison, a fine, or both. Any information that's taken from your computers or your phones can be retained by police. How has this been used? Well, a statistical analysis by the Equality and Human Rights Commission found that in the year 2012 to 2013, 54,000 people were stopped in British airports. It found that Asian people were 11 times more likely to be stopped, and concluded, rather unsurprisingly, that stereotyping was the key factor behind why people were stopped, rather than intelligence. That particular piece of legislation was also used to detain David Miranda. Now, he's the partner of Graham Greenwald, who's a journalist who blew the lid on the NSA, the National Security Agency in the US, global surveillance program. He was held, again, for 9 hours, and his computers and his electronic equipment seized and copied. Dame Helena Kennedy, QC, stated, commenting on the case, "If someone travelling as part of journalistic work can be lawfully detained like this, questioned for hours, his electronic equipment confiscated, something's gone wrong with the law." She also concluded that, in her experience, that it targets minorities who are 42 times more likely overall to be stopped. As she says, as this goes on, let's keep the core message clear. Schedule 7 may be lawful, but it's really rotten law. Now, this is a law that applies to ports. The next set of legislation applies anywhere in the UK. and that was Section 44. Thankfully, it doesn't exist anymore because the European Court of Human Rights struck it down as illegal. But police officers were given the power to stop and search anyone in a designated area. Wherever they said is a designated area, anyone could be stopped. It was used in 1 year alone to stop 150, effectively rounded up, 1,000 people. It was so broadly drawn that on a rolling basis what had happened was they designated the whole of Greater London as a designated area. So police could stop anyone without any suspicion at all and ask them questions and search their vehicle. And this went on for 10 years. In effect, it was used against peaceful protesters, not just terrorists. Again, black and
Go on. Some microphone on?
That was my Bjork thing.
Onko ne mikit päällä täällä jossain, vai onko ne kiinni?
I'll just speak up. Yeah, that's okay. Black and Asians were between 5 and 7 times more likely to be stopped. And in fact, despite 150,000 people being examined under this piece of legislation, not a single person was subsequently convicted of a terrorism offence. Like I said, it was struck down by the European Court of Human Rights in the end. Terrorism laws come onto the books as things that are used to stop terrorists. But what we have found is that terrorism laws have a nasty way of creeping away from their intended purpose and actually getting into the circulation of everywhere, to the trivial. For example, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, used terror laws to track down licence fee dodgers. Now, this is a fee that people in the UK, if you watch television, you have to pay £146 a year. Terrorism laws were used to find out whether you paid it or not. The local councils, local government, they have used these laws to spy on a particular family, the Jenny Patton and Tim Joyce. They used it over a 3-week period to spy on them because they suspected wrongly that they were lying about their address so they could send their daughters to a better school. The Press Association looked into various councils and how they actually used the terrorism powers. Derby City Council, Bolton, Gateshead and Hartlepool used terrorism powers to see whether people were not cleaning up after their dogs had pooed in the park. They use it for investigating littering, which is just dropping rubbish in the streets, the misuse of disabled parking badges, claim for damages and working whilst off sick. The problem really is discretion. The wide definition allows for a 2-tier system to be created. In the leading case of Gull, which was in the Supreme Court in the UK, the judges there remarked upon Mr. Anderson, who's the reviewer of the independent review of terrorism laws, where he opinioned that the definition is remarkably broad and absurdly so in some cases. The consequence of this broad definition is to grant unusually wide discretions to all those concerned with the application of counter-terrorism law, from ministers to the very police officers themselves. The prosecutorial discretion was found not to be intended for this purpose. Effectively, the discretion creates the offence, whereas law is meant to be about knowing what is prescribed so you avoid that behaviour. The point is it creates a superposition of criminality. Something is both legal and illegal at the same time until a particular person says that it isn't. It's the circular notion of terrorism. It's in court opinion this was intrinsically unattractive and has the effect delegated to an appointee of the executive the decision whether an activity should be treated as criminal for the purposes of prosecution. Such a device should be deployed, if at all, very rarely, just because it risks undermining the rule of law. the legislative function is given to an unelected body who does not make democratically accountable decisions in the same way as Parliament. Such a device leaves citizens unclear as to whether or not their actions or projected actions are liable to be treated by the prosecuting authorities as innocent or criminal. Simply, you just don't know. A lawyer can't advise somebody if they're going to do something or they propose to do something, whether this is right or wrong or will fall within criminality, because it's the prosecutor or the director of public prosecution or the Attorney General who actually decides whether that action, retrospectively, was terrorism or not. The question then is, when you're given this much discretion, can you trust those in authority? We have the scenario of al-Saidi and the Belhaji families who were rendered and tortured in the joint CIA-MI6, so that's the Americans and British colluding together to have these families basically delivered over to the Libyan or the pre-Libyan regime for torture. Those families now are using the help of Reprieve, a legal charity, to sue the British government. What came out of this was that the government was forced to release secret policies which showed that GCHQ, the security services, had for years advised their staff that they may target the communication of lawyers and use legally privileged materials. What that meant was that where the government's being sued, the government's own policy was, we can undermine the legal privilege between clients, so we can find out about how they're suing us and then respond to that. So if a government is able to access such communications, particularly in the case where they are the party being sued, it hands itself an unfairly legal advantage in court and frankly makes a mockery of the justice system. Remember, this is not agents who are working as rogues doing something wrong all by themselves. This was government policy. We have John Yates. He was found to be involved in a scandal with the News of the World, and he was the previous head of the counter-terrorism department. He had to resign. He was then taken over by Cecilia Dick. She was the leading officer of the Jean-Charles de Menezes shooting in the London Undergrounds. So you have not the great and the good, but the tainted and the ugly being given the positions of power in the use of this legislation. Again, Richard Watson, he was temporarily suspended. I understand now he's back reinstated, and he was found to be lying in evidence in a government inquiry about a racial killing. Not the great and the good, the bad and the ugly. The Home Office itself, in terms of statistics, I don't know if you can see, but this is a Home Office statistical graph which allegedly shows the use of terrorism laws over time versus the use of other laws, because the terrorism laws are controversial. However, what it says there is the use of the Terrorism Law 2000, Terrorism Act 2000. And yes, that act has been used less and less, but there are all these other acts on the side. So actually what you need to do is to add these two graphs together, and what you'd see is a curve that went sort of that way, rather than anything else. This is apparently an accurate representation of official statistics. Far from it. We'll skirt over Mr. Green because it's a bit long and I want to shorten this if we can. So the question is, are the anti-terror laws working? Well, here are a list of the cases. 2013 are in blue, 2012, 2011 are in green and orange, again 2010. Every year we have seen at least one case, if not multiple cases, of terrorism in the UK. This is the threat level in the UK over time. It's never dropped below substantial. So if the definition of whether a law is working or not is that its ability to dissuade a section of the public from engaging in prescribed behaviour, then no, it's not working. And why not? Why isn't it working? Well, because citizens are unclear as to whether or not their actions are liable to be treated by prosecuting authorities as innocent or criminal. We just don't know what is terrorism, what isn't. And the more you set up grievances for people, that encourages them to do the things that are causing them grievance. So effectively the laws are counterproductive and are arbitrary. So what is the conclusion over the last 15 years? The experience in the UK has been a troubling one. We've seen the introduction of an avalanche of terrorism legislation, and the effect of these laws in practice has been the creation of a Jekyll and Hyde two-tier parallel legal system a normal one, the Jekyll system, where all the checks and balances which come with 1,000 years of legal theory, experience, and development are in place. But then we have another one, its twin brother. It's a darker system, and it's born in a hurry and almost annually restated. The Hyde system is one which introduces the notion of secret trials, books as terrorist materials, speech as a threat to national security, and the bizarre concept of superpositional prohibitions through engorged discretion. This system shares more with the conceptual strangeness of quantum mechanics than it does with conventional legal theory. Furthermore, we've seen the mugging, and I use that word appropriately, the mugging under threat of civil rights from the citizenry and powers devolved to the hands of unelected and secret organisations who also demand vast sums of money with next to no accountability. We've watched a creeping of terror legislations away from its professed purpose and into general civic circulation and even mundane use, such as we've spoken before, the enforcement of canine fecal laws. Wherever we see the citizenry stripped of rights and unelected vested with king-like power, we should call it what it is, and that is a breeding ground for fascism. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akunjee. But we'll start. Before the panel discussion, we still have one speech which will be delivered by Anna Sekular, a spokesperson for CAGE UK, which is an independent advocacy group working to empower communities impacted by the war on terror. That's in the UK mainly, and internationally. Anna has a master's in arts in human rights and culture diversity from the University of Essex. And she's worked on a number of projects at CAGE and campaigns as well since August 2014, including Guantanamo Bay cases and cases within the Middle East and the UK. She's also worked on prevent-related cases, and she's also here today to talk about that, mainly the impact of terrorism legislation on the Muslim community in the UK, and with the prevent strategy in mind and focus. So I'd like to invite her to the stage.
Hello everyone, thank you very much, and thank you to the excellent speeches earlier. So yes, I'm from CAGE UK, and I will explain at the end of the talk more about why CAGE is here and sort of the relevance of CAGE's work to Finland and what specifically CAGE has been going through in the last year or so. This is just a very good quote by our outreach director, Mazen Beg. Probably some of you know his case. He was arrested last year, former Guantanamo Bay prisoner, and he was arrested last year for Syria-related charges and released a couple of months ago. So I just, can everybody see it? I can just read it. Never in the history of this country has there been a group of people that have been subjected to the types of relocations like the Muslims are facing today. Just quick information there about CAGE UK, so you know about the work that we do. But our main focus is to support communities affected by the war on terror, so mainly Muslim communities. We work in the UK. Pretty much it's a sort of community-based work with a lot of cases, especially on prevent, which I will go into now, which Tasnime touched on a bit earlier. This is a very good quote about what prevent is, or how it could be described. This is a quote by someone who used to advise in the government's counter-terrorism unit. So prevent is preventing violent extremism. It's one of the 4 P's of the UK government's post-9/11 counter-terrorism strategy, known as contest. So I will focus, out of the 4 P's, I will focus on prevent, which is aimed at to stop people from becoming terrorists and supporting terrorism. So here I'm sort of explaining what prevent is, or what prevent has been used for. And I'm going to try and go through the slides quite quickly because there's quite a lot that prevent it sort of influences, and prevent is sort of one of the classic examples, or a very excellent example of how Muslim communities are affected by terrorism policies, terrorism legislation. And prevent is something that affects in levels in university, in healthcare, in education, in many different areas of someone's life. So I won't read everything in every single slide, but you can just sort of have a look. So basically, with prevent, so there has been a move away from persecution for violence to persecuting and criminalizing for ill-defined terms and activities like extremism, and now, well, in the past few years, of radicalization. And obviously the theories and the ideas behind what is extremism and what is radicalization theories are put forward by the authorities or by the policymakers. And these are sort of the ideas of sort of from neoconservative think tanks or groups like the Quilliam Foundation, which are sort of behind that way of thinking of extremism or radicalization. So KH has done a significant report on prevent policy, and I will go into that at the end of the talk. But basically what we sort of try to explain in this prevent report is that the prevent policy is a central part of the domestic war on terror in the UK that is impacting Muslim communities, and it has redefined the relationship between the UK government and its Muslim citizens. And one of the areas that Cage focuses on is, or tries to sort of address, is the absence of rule of law in this war on terror. So, for example, if you look at prevent, for example, you can see quite a lot of sort of the ways that there is this absence of rule of law or due process, or there's sort of this dual system that has come to existence for Muslims separately from the rest of the citizens. And so I will just quickly speak about what what is addressed, or what is the ideology that is referred to, or what is sort of the ideology that Prevent is trying to sort of tackle in its policies. And so if you just look here, what we've found out is that Prevent's causal analysis and theory is fundamentally flawed. Prevent incorrectly conflates defeating an ideology which it describes as Islamism with defeating terrorism. So according to this strategy, the cause of violence in the Muslim world is rooted in ideology, whereas in reality the cause is the political struggle of Muslims in response to unrepresentative regimes, which are often aided by Western policy and occupations. So, for example, if you take this idea that there is an ideology, a specific ideology that is then pushed for, with, for example, Williams and these kind of neocon think tanks, that kind of version of Islam, then sort of you miss the point, or you miss the point that all terrorists and acts of political violence have an ideology or goal. However, terrorism and political violence is not caused by ideology, it is a methodology. So to go out and look for an ideology as the cause, or if we talk about, I'm talking about here a theology, then that will not end the politically motivated violence which they claim to be trying to end, because that does not address the political causes which would be sort of motivated. So so PREVENT focuses on dealing with religious and political ideology instead of addressing the political struggles that lead to violence that need a solution. So PREVENT sort of goes into various areas, education and healthcare, like I mentioned before. So I'll just quickly go through a couple of examples that we've worked on, and a couple of examples that sort of highlights how PREVENT can be seen affecting the Muslim community. So in education, we have quite a lot of cases, especially with universities I personally worked on, where you have PREVENT officers, so these specially sort of trained officers who are expected to know sort of this, are expected to know sort of Islam, are expected to sort of know, understand the community. And so we have these officers who come into the universities, and for example, they will ask go to the Islamic societies and ask for the Friday prayers, the Jummah prayers, khutbah, to be given to them for screening before it can be read out during Jummah. So they sort of, for example, in this they will screen, if there's any extremist elements, or if there's anything, that they basically don't like. Because sort of one of the points is that there is a certain idea of Islam that they want to push, and a certain sort of their version or their sort of idea of an acceptable Islam. So all of these, in everything that basically PREVENT does is they try to root out that non-acceptable version of Islam. So, for example, Channel Project is one of the main sort of projects in PREVENT and education, and that's primarily targeted for young people aged between 15 and 24. But there have been much younger children who have been referred. And basically what it does is they seek to identify early on those people who are considered to be vulnerable or at risk of being drawn towards violence, towards extremism or violence. So we have had cases at KH where people have come and they've been through this Channel Project program, and it's very traumatic for them. And they basically cooperate together with the police and other agencies, and then have these, these people, for example, at school or somewhere, they see that that person might be, drawn towards extremism or violence, then they will refer them to the Channel program. So here's just some figures from between April 2007 and March 2013, and you can see the very big jump from 2006 to 2013. And although, so 35% were under 18 years of age, and we don't know how many were under 15 years of age. So now, what I was explaining earlier was the sort of acceptable ways of Islam and acceptable things and not acceptable ways of Islam. So what Prevent does is they will look for certain indicators in someone of, for example, certain opinions, or increase, for example, if someone starts dressing up more religiously or starts supporting certain causes. So those will be signs that, you know, Prevent should be interested. And these are sort of, in this case, when you, so in this case, for example, anything from rejection of UK foreign policy to distrust of Western media will be already some signs, that Prevent should get involved. So I'll just show quickly some indicators of risk, which are, these are listed by Prevent. For example, simple expressed opinions or behavioral changes, like I mentioned. And these are just some of the reports that have been in the media. You can just see there from the titles themselves that police identified 200 children as potential terrorists. 9-year-old schoolboy in East London was referred to the authorities after allegedly showing signs of extremism, and that is the youngest case known in Britain. So you have literally children, and you just, last week or a couple of days ago, there was announcement that nurseries will now have to start looking at signs of radicalization in children as part of Prevent. So I'll quickly jump ahead to universities. So as I mentioned, basically this is Prevent comes. We'll go to different societies, for example, Islamic and Palestinian societies especially, and we'll put officers there and we'll tell them, you know, we'll go through the material, we'll harass them. In my university there's been that. Also, especially in London areas, they've been, Prevent officers are very active over there. So I'll just skip that. Probably something that's quite interesting that is on the mosques and charities and Prevent. And this is a quote by the chairman of the Charity Commission. So you can understand. You can sort of understand the direction that the Charity Commission has taken since this man took office, and it's literally. I don't know if you can see that. So that's William Shawcross in the middle, and then you have sort of what you can see from there. But basically, that is the process of making suspect charities in the UK. Also, charities that have been supporting Cage are being investigated as well. So just quickly about charities, that since 9/11 most Muslim charities have been started to be viewed through the lens of terrorism, and Charity Commission has fully embraced Prevent since the appointment of William Shawcross, who made that statement. And so mosques are increasingly being sort of targeted by Prevent officers, and also Prevent now also there's another side that's come up to it, which is that because of Prevent, people are starting to sort of back away from people who have anything to do. And Prevent will fund certain mosques or certain youth groups, for example. So people will sort of now started to shy away from anyone who has anything to do with Prevent officers. And just healthcare quickly. So this is the same as channel program which I mentioned about education, but this is in the health sector, where basically staff are asked to look for signs of radicalization in their patients, and sort of see if they're dressing differently, and they have sort of specific staff to do this. And actually, most of the staff is increasingly being trained to do this. So it's a common kind of a workshop that Prevent does for the healthcare sector. So these are just sort of the regular things that they are told to look for in patients, who are suspected of joining a terrorist group. So these are probably the most important ones. So distrust of Western media, misconception or rejection of UK foreign policy, which obviously, if you consider the situation in many countries at the moment, for example, the majority of the Muslim community in the UK, for example, will be speaking a lot about Syria or Gaza or any of those things. So that will automatically translate into that you have a distrust or rejection of UK foreign policy. And these are sort of the issues that we've picked up and caged from this Prevent policy within the health sector. Sorry, I have to go really fast, running out of time. And this is just a comment about the Prevent policy by someone from the British Medical Association, which basically shows that what they are asking doctors and nurses and staff to do essentially violates that basic doctor-patient confidentiality. And it puts the staff into a very difficult position. But at the same time, a lot of the staff is Muslim too. Okay, I don't know how much time we have to do. Full time? Okay.
We're out of time.
We're out of time?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I just conclude? Okay, well, basically, I think the most important thing to get out from Prevent is the criminalization that is taking place in a widely scattered plan where Muslims are sort of targeted on almost every aspect of their lives, whether it's with their children or in schools or university or in healthcare, and this is all sort of part of sort of preventing, terrorism, preventing these terrorists from, being able to, act. But the point is in the Prevent is that what they are looking for is flawed in itself. They have this specific concept or a specific ideology they have created that they then sort of projects out there, and anyone who doesn't fit into that ideology is automatically targeted by Prevent, and that will be any area, whether it's children or healthcare or in any of those areas. Just see if there's anything. Okay, well, to wrap up, just see. So okay. There's a lot of stuff that I'm missing now, but basically what's important now in terms of the UK is that they've just announced that they're going to bring in new counter-terrorism measures, which basically, if you know the UK's counter-terrorism policies and legislation, and especially the last 13 years, it's obvious and it's clear, and there's no question about it, that it is a second-class citizenship for Muslims, and it is, as Tasnime earlier said, it is a sort of a two-tier system, legal system in the UK for Muslims, and sort of these new counter-terrorism measures will basically sort of just turn what's already happening on the ground into law. and especially that you can see in the confiscation of or removal of passports and citizenship, which we are seeing a lot in terms of, especially in terms of Syria, where they are now, trying to also prevent people from coming back to the UK. And this was just a really quick quote, I think. This is to do with citizenship, but it also has to do with more widely with the terrorism policies. And this is, I think, a good point also quite relevant in Finland, because Finland has also been speaking about looking to the UK and how the UK is handling the terrorism issue or the terrorism problem. And you need to look deeper and you need to look further. You need to look at policies like prevent, because that is essentially already what Finland will be looking at, what Finland is already looking at in programs like Anchor, where they, want to look for signs of radicalization and working with health sector people or mental health professionals.
Yeah. All right. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's a shame that we have such limited time or resources of time. I think we have to move on to the panel discussion at the moment, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Reetta Toivanen, who will be the moderator of the panel discussion, so that we can get it underway.
So, very nice afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for Anna for the interesting information. Sorry for hurrying you up, but I think we can return in the panel discussion maybe for those issues that you were raising. So, very quickly, the panel has the name Possible Problem Areas and Consequences of Anti-terrorism Legislation. And I think we should be reminded here that we are not only talking about those intended consequences of anti-terrorism legislation, but we have to bear in mind all the unintended effects, and therefore there would not be the issue of this panel to just discuss the kind of legal problems, but also to pay attention to the context and to those communities on which these laws have an effect and in which ways they may be perverted. So we have to pay attention to those issues that are actually called the social life of laws. Now I will quickly introduce the speakers, and I have taken the liberty to change a bit the order of speakers, and therefore I would like to ask you actually all to come here. The first person to introduce is Superintendent Timo Kilpeläinen, who is from the National Police Board of Finland. His main duties are the planning, developing and supervising and directing 11 local police departments, the National Bureau of Investigation, the Finnish Security Intelligence Services and the Police University College on issues of regarding terrorism and preventing violent extremism. Very much welcome, Timo.
Thank you.
Then the second speaker who I would also like to have coming here is Evwaraye, who is a senior advisor at the Ministry of Interior. He is the secretary of the Finnish National Network for Countering and Preventing Violent Extremism, and his work is very much on coordinating the work between authorities, municipalities, and NGOs, the kind of third sector persons here in Finland. Then the third speaker is Pia Jardi, who is the vice chairman of the Islamic Council in Finland. She is working for the social services of the city of Helsinki, is a well-known expert on immigration issues and also working in a voluntary basis in many Islamic organizations, and actually a quite frequent speaker for many years when it comes to Islam-related immigration matters, if I may say so. And then the fourth one will be Martin Scheinin, who was already introduced, but those of you who don't know, he was a long-time director of the Institute of Human Rights at Åbo Academy here in Finland, and now been already too many years in Italy, at the European University Institute as a professor of international law and human rights, and worked as the first special rapporteur for the UN on human rights and countering terrorism. And then the fourth speaker is Mohammed Tasnime Akunjee. I think he is there. And was already also introduced, working at the moment for the Ford solicitors and a specialist on terrorism law, especially in the UK, and a frequent commentator in different forums on those issues. I have now asked the panelists to speak just 5 minutes commenting on the questions of, especially pertaining to the question that discrimination and anti-discrimination law and the effects on community, and the different persons, of course, taking different perspectives on the issues. After those short comments or speeches, I will open the floor. And now I really beg you, please, my dear audience, just very short questions, not long speeches, and just questions to the speakers and around this matter that is on the problem areas and consequences of anti-discrimination, anti-terrorism legislation. Thank you. So, Timo, if you would kindly start. Okay. You can either speak from there or come here, whatever is better for you.
Okay, maybe it's better if I sit here. Yeah. Thank you, and on behalf of the Finnish police, and first of all, I would like to thank organizations to invite us to participate in this event, because I think that all these kind of sessions that we discuss together of the phenomenon of terrorism are very important to increase our common knowledge and understanding of the challenging multidimensional issue of terrorism. I think that it's good for the start to describe very briefly what the Finnish authorities and Finland, how we are approaching these countering terrorism, and what kind of things we have done already here in Finland. The main focus of countering terrorism, we don't have a war on terror here in Finland. We are countering terrorism, and our main focus is on the prevention. And I'm actually very happy to say that we are happy not to follow all the steps that UK has taken, and like Mr. Scheinin mentioned, the legislation might be a little bit difficult to read and understand, but I think that it's good that in Finland we are taking these slow steps. We see that it's really vital to combat the causes of violent radicalization. Mr. Evwaraye is an expert on this topic, and it's a cooperation on the local level we do with the communities, with our Muslim diaspora, with our associations and different people. So when we talk about countering terrorism, it's not just the police or other authorities we need to tackle this problem. We need to have all the individuals and all the citizens to take part of these issues. I think that our firm belief of Finland is that any measures against terrorism, whether international or national, must be fully compatible with human rights law, international humanitarian law, and refugee law in order to be effective and legitimate. And Mr. Scheinin mentioned also the quite recent United Nations Security Council's Resolution 2178, and that is something that might be seen as a post-effect of the Syrian conflict. We see what happened, and we saw what happened after the 9/11. We had a huge amount of new legislation that was made in different countries, also in the EU member states, and also we have here in Finland implemented all the different kind of resolutions. And I'm actually very happy to say that regarding this UN resolution, we are now taking the step of consideration what it might mean here in Finland. Do we need a new kind of discriminations, new legislation or whatsoever? So we don't have any actual plans to build up a new legislation regarding this. But I also would like to remind you that we actually have quite recent legislation, like Mr. Scheinin mentioned, and which actually became effective from the beginning of this year, and we have new laws that extends the criminalization of financing of terrorism, and also if somebody travels abroad for the purposes to get training for the terrorist purposes, it's also criminalized now here in Finland. Also, I would lastly like to point out one very important issue, that is the foreign terrorist fighters, which has been quite largely discussed in the media, also here in Finland and abroad, and that's something that we have to be ready to handle these individuals that are returning back home from the conflict areas. We have estimated 60 people that have traveled abroad to Syrian conflict. We have 20 returnees. But as heard, and we all know that we have only 2 cases of pre-trial investigation of the terrorist offences. I think that is a good example and shows quite well that Finnish police and Finnish authorities are not interpreting the terrorist legislation here in Finland like our colleagues are doing abroad. Of course, the situation is not the same in the UK or in Finland, and that's something that we want to keep the situation like it is right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then Erik.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The organizers, I'm very grateful to be here today. Like Mr. Kilpeläinen mentioned earlier, there perhaps is no road to understanding or success in issues like these without deep dialogue and debate also, and at times even heated debate. There's perhaps 5 points I would like to come out with regarding the issue. First of all, before perhaps my 5 points, I'm not a legal expert and I don't work in the legal domain, but I'm very grateful for the last speaker to present some challenges regarding prevention policy, which is what I work with, and also the potential failings of a prevention policy. From a certain point of view, you could very crudely divide the question of terrorism as a legal approach to this issue or a specific issue, and it acts and happens in the legal frame. From the Finnish point of view, how we look at it from the perspective of countering violent extremism, it's a somewhat different frame. It's perhaps more of a psychosocial look on the issue of extremism and radicalization, that perhaps being my main point. That obviously affects on how you look at it. I think one of the most important things to realize and acknowledge at this point is that a legal solution towards violence in general or violent extremism isn't the way to go, so to speak. If in general we want to reduce violence in our society, we know criminology. You don't have to be a PhD. You have to have a PhD in criminology to know that regardless of sanctions, violence will exist. Unfortunately, our country is a good proof of that, perhaps in a sense where we have spontaneous alcohol-related violence quite a bit. Perhaps point number two, that's important for the Finnish policy and Finnish point of view is that we look at preventing all forms of violent extremism, regardless of the ideological origin of the individual or the group engaged in that form of violent extremism. We know that different forms of violent extremism perpetuate each other. That being perhaps a major point, and also from the point of view that it's not a question, it's a very pragmatic approach to it, where regardless of what sort or what kind of driving factor stands behind, it's equally detrimental to society. Perhaps one of the most key points, and this is addressing what the previous or the last speaker brought forth regarding the potential failings of the UK prevent policy, and this is, I think, very, very important for me to stress. Our national policy is not an anti-ideology policy. To put it very bluntly, we don't care what you think. The government shouldn't care what people think, and freedom of speech is one of the human rights that's highly valued. But it's an anti-violence policy where prevention is targeted towards preventing violence. We're not working towards changing how people think, because that's not within the domain of the public policy in our view, or perhaps in the view of our public society. Relating to this, point number 4 perhaps, is that violent extremism is not an ethnic issue, it's not a racial issue, it's not a religious issue. And henceforth, policy regarding violent extremism, prevention of violent extremism, shouldn't have to deal with these. Again, not trying to affect the way a person thinks per se, but rather affecting the way a person would act. If you look at what's being done currently and where focuses lie in the work that's being done, we have the phenomenon of finished school shooters, for example. I know of people who've brought this forth and have proposed a very provoking question, a question I like to ask people as well. What if Finnish school shooters would have had the Quran in their back pocket while committing their act? What would society's response have been in these discussions? This is my personal opinion. Unfortunately, I believe society's response would have been quite a bit stronger. I think we can all more or less agree on that. That shouldn't be the case. That hasn't to do with the amount of victims as a result of these acts, and from this point of view, equal prevention efforts are currently being put into equal, if not even more, are being put into prevention of this sort of ideologically motivated violence in comparison to issues coming from foreign fighting, for example, potential issues coming from foreign fighting, for example. My last point being the question of cooperation. Yes, we have a national policy on prevention of violent extremism that has to do with the government actions, but by no means is the government stance is that this is something that should be done by the government. This is something that can be mandated for people to do, but rather a question of mutual understanding and actual cooperation. I'm happy to say that we cooperate with quite a number of different communities, different NGOs and organizations on this issue, and I'm also very happy to say that we have no leverage, not money to deal out, or other steering instruments that might pollute or taint the work that's being done in this country. It ends up in a situation where perhaps at times development is slower than we'd want. We don't get things moving as quickly here in Finland as we would want, or as the public opinion would perhaps require. But at the same time, how should I say, the work continues uncorrupt, so to speak, in good partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we are coming from the superintendent high level of listening to cooperation and kind of also some grassroots perspective from Mari, and then I would like to invite Pia Jardi.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Täällä on varmaan aika monta. Sorry, I'm talking in Finnish. There is so quite many Muslim experts here, so I'm just one of them. and equal to anybody here. And I would like to talk from the point of community and how it affects these issues to us, how it affects to our children, more likely than to the legal issues, what it's taught here by other people. First thing first, if you look now, we look average people how they look terrorist. If person he is religiously fundamental, he is very quickly looked terrorist. Just speaking or dressing differently makes him terrorist in eyes of people, and this is because of the press and media, what they have been bringing up to the media. So this is one of the issues how Muslim you will feel as a Muslim person when you are you start to be afraid of how you can speak. You want to defend the weak of Syria, the weak people of Iraq. You want to talk about in behalf of them, but you start to think that can I talk in behalf of them without being labeled as a terrorist. So this is one of the issues that we start to think in everyday actions as Muslims. We start to think, like yesterday I sent money to my relatives. So I'm thinking, so if it goes to the wrong hands, so who is going, from where I cannot have proofs in it? Because we have this case in court which it was convicted people for sending money. So even in some kind of unsecure countries, if you send money, maybe you don't even know to whom it end up in the end, but you did send it maybe to your mother, maybe to your father, so you don't know. You may be just randomly accused. Then also, it's a question of charity. People really, they want to help. They want to help the people who are in need in Syria. They want to help people in need in Iraq, in Burma, in everywhere. But start to be like a little bit, you start to be cautious that can I now raise this up? Can I start to talk publicly about these issues? And when I'm raising money, so what next? It comes. This is something now we are talking about in general issues of raising money, funds, charity, and this kind of issues. But at the same time, it's okay to raise money in Christian organizations or governmental organizations. It's very okay. There is no problem. But just when there is the Muslim label, so it becomes suspicion. So altogether, Muslims, we are walking suspects in this country. If we are visible Muslims. So this we come to another case, which is to modernize Muslims, some kind of efforts to modernize Muslims, to come to tell that what is good Muslim. Look, I think Anna talked in her speech about this one, what kind of Muslim you can be, how you can dress that you are like a normal Muslim. You fit to the structures of the country where are you. And this is, I will call it, the more danger issue, because we are now affecting our children. Like for example, we have issues in schools that children, they are asked to swim, and some parents, they don't want that their girls or boys, they swim in mixed swimming classes. So when they go to the school next time to ask that I don't want my child to swim, so next time somebody will start to talk, no, maybe this is like radicalist, because now she doesn't want her children to swim. So this is the issues, they just go little by little. I mean, even if it is little things, they start to affect people, parents, they are start to get afraid to ask schools their rights about the issues, about it. They start to hide the same what it did happen. You see what it did happen in Australia when the woman start to take care of her dress. So you have to become invisible to be acceptable Muslim. And this one, I will say that it's more dangerous, which we have to try to, especially in Finland, we don't have so many Muslims, but we can be visible Muslims. And alhamdulillah, I see here we have visible Muslims here, and all are behaving very well. And I mean, generally, this is the issue how we have to try to tackle also as a government. We don't have to go to listen to somebody who tells that you Muslims, or take experts to tell that this is Islam, how we can talk. We have to really start to know also that fundamental religiousness, it's not terrorism, and this it has to be brought out in the public also, to the public, because when I get ridiculous questions from people. as a Muslim. Nobody, Christian can never, or atheist, don't get these questions from people just because I am a Muslim. So I get to answer about many issues. I am like responsible for the whole world because I am a Muslim. So I am responsible for all your actions. Whatever you do, it's my mistake. I always thought that Muslim acts always with the motivation of Islam, but other people act with the motivation of, I don't know, craziness or about humanity or whatever. But for Muslim, we don't act, our motivation is always Islam. Do it like, especially when it comes to bad things. But if we do good things, then it's motivation of humanity or peace or something. So this is one of the issues we have to really start to talk them out loud. And this is how also I am afraid of for our children, because they start to lose their identity. They start to, yes, we have to be part of the society, be part of active citizens, but then we have to be able to be ourselves. Less religious, more religious, whatever. Shia, Sunni, we should be able to be what we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because we are running out of time, I was wondering if Tasnime or Martin have something very important to add, or can we start immediately having questions from the audience, or would you have to...
We can go ahead to the discussion, I'm fine with that.
What about Tasnime?
No, I think that's fine.
Yeah. So, the floor is open, and I understand that you are very eager to ask questions. Now, keep them short and don't tell your life stories, because this is not the place to solve your personal problems. Please go ahead. Just wait for the microphone, please.
Thank you for the wonderful speech. My questions will go to Mr. Akunjee and Mr. Martin Scheinin. Mr. Akunjee, based on your presentation, I would clearly believe or assume that the UK is going back to the period time before the Magna Carta. I would say so. And if that is the case, what the people of UK could do to correct the situation? And the question to Mr. Martin, the elements and the fundamentals of that terrorism act are against the fundamentals of human rights, if I believe so. How did we come into this situation accepting acts that are against human rights? Thank you.
Okay, good questions. Let's have some more questions and collect them. Here was one. And then in the back will be the third one. Can you see the purple? Yep, please.
Hello, here is Abhimanyu. I have two questions also to Mr. Akunjee and Professor Scheinin. As per your definitions of terrorism, if it is, we just think that the systematic use of violence, that our understanding, at least my understanding, is also the way America started to kill the people when I see in Iraq, in Fallujah, and it's also terrorism. Why you people are not speaking about this? This is my first question. Second question about understanding. To my understanding, the whole thing, the way regarding legal or other things, it looks to me is not okay. Because if I see the Europol statistics for the last 10 years terrorism report, I have been there, and FBI report, it says only 3% terrorism done by the Muslim. 97% terrorism done by non-Muslim. But concerning terrorism, the first thing comes, Muslims are terrorists. So my first understanding, the problem is understanding. And the whole legal thing, whatever it looks to us, to me especially, when you don't have real attitude, when you don't have correct attitude, when you don't have real understanding, then you will make mistake. America is big power, so we don't speak. UK is also a big ally with America, we don't speak. When they are making, what about killing hundreds and thousands of people?
Okay, I think the question was now answered. Thank you. And that was the 2 questions, and then we have 1 question. You have the microphone already, so please go ahead. The micro is maybe not on. Can you check on that?
Hello?
Okay, now. Yeah.
Yes, I was just thinking, how do we actually in Finland identify like a susceptible terrorist or someone who is, I don't know, someone who we think that could be active in that sort or maybe even interested? And why do we always, if it's a certain situation where someone is suspected to be a terrorist, we always take action because something was mentioned that in Finland we don't care what people think, but we care about violence. But then again, when it comes to media, we always see and we always try to control what like Muslims think or the way of thinking, but we don't control the media because if we are against violent extremism, the media is doing that exactly because in a way, when you bring out the word Muslim all the time in these situations, you are basically making people be scared of Muslims, and that raises violence against Muslims. So in a way, we are actually actively also doing that violent extremism. It means it's a different situation, but then again, it's still happening. So we should be against violence, but then again, I feel like in some part, this is actually bringing up more violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we take 1 more question, and you there in the middle, yes? If you can get the micro too. And then I also invite you, dear panelists, if you want to ask questions to each other, and you are also feel free to do so.
Hello, my name is Evwaraye, and my question is primarily to Mr. Kilpeläinen. How much police resources have been used to investigate Finnish people going to fight with the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, whether they committed war crimes or not?
Thank you very much. Then 1 more question, please. I try to keep track of the question.
I have a question, almost similar with Murra's question to Scheinin, Ari, and Kilpeläinen. Let's talk about Hamas. Hamas EU's courthouse has judged that Hamas should be taken off the terrorist list a few weeks ago. So what I'm asking now is, when EU court decides that if now I send to my people money for resistance, for the resistance movement in Palestine, or I want to go and defend Gaza, because I come from Gaza, born in Finland, but come from Gaza. If I want to go there defend, when I can go and will I get judged here about terrorist laws?
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So very good. Yeah, we continue now. Just let's take these questions first, and because you already were allowed to ask 1 question, you will not be allowed to ask another question. I'm sorry. This is about human rights. Now, please, the panelists, if you would like to, I think Martin, if you would like to start, because I know that you are a bit in a hurry. So you can pick up those questions that you find relevant, and also pose questions to each other if you wish so.
Yes. Apologies, I'm leaving 5:05 for a train, and I'm not in a hurry. It was just a thing from the beginning.
Yeah, yes, that's it. And actually we have to the universities also, I understand, closing.
So, a couple of quick questions. I start from the last one. Before starting to send money to Hamas, please consider that the EU court decided that Hamas was wrongly put on the EU terrorist list, procedurally wrong, but it will remain there for 3 months so that the EU Council can find a legal way of putting them on the list or remove them from the list. But meanwhile, they stay on the list. So patience, please. It was not a substantive decision that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. It was not a substantive decision that Hamas is a terrorist organization. It was simply a procedural decision that they were wrongly so far put on the list, and that has to be fixed in the next 3 months. Patience. Then I think the law should be the same for America and others, and to me terrorism is about killing bystanders, killing the innocent, using violence in the symbolic sense of not targeting your actual enemy but somebody else. And therefore most violence in armed conflict is not terrorism, because it's fight against your real enemy. And I would say most of the violence committed by the United States of America and the military troops is therefore not terrorism. It may constitute other crimes, other international crimes, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and in many cases it constitutes human rights violations, but not so often terrorism, I would say. But of course, whoever commits a terrorist act, American or other, should be treated the same way. How did we come to this situation that in the name of countering terrorism so many human rights are violated? I think basically because of a reaction in panic. Governments wanted to be seen to do something, and this resulted in a whole flow of new legislation, right, center and left, criminalizing this and that, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and targeting various groups for their potential risk of constituting terrorists. However, I think it's, in a sense, good news to pass the message that everybody is affected. Everybody's human rights are more or less compromised because of the fight against terrorism. And I think that's the most important lesson from the Snowden revelations, that fully ordinary people, law-abiding lawyers, journalists, us, white, middle-aged academics, our human rights are also violated through the surveillance. It's primarily the right to privacy, but then also data protection rights, freedom of expression. Everybody is affected, and therefore I hope there could be a community of opinions that those who are targeted more than others would join with us who are targeted less, and we could fight together against the various measures that violate human rights in the name of combating terrorism. Terrorists do exist, and terrorists should be punished seriously. And in order to make that message clear, I think we would need more narrow definitions of terrorism, concentrating our efforts on real cases of terrorism, and then demonstrating that we all condemn those acts of terrorism in the strongest possible terms. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who would like to?
Yes, I'll address the Magna Carta
Please
question,
take the microphone.
if I could.
Yeah.
That's a good point to do with the terrorism laws. How do they fit in with the concept of law and the equality under the law that Magna Carta brought? They just don't. They don't fit in. They were specifically designed not to fit into that. The terrorism laws have been argued as a special category for a special type of offence, and so the normal checks and balances that would apply, the normal standards of proof of evidence and standards of proof of culpability, are suspended. Effectively, this is why I call it the Jekyll and Hyde two-tier system. As long as somebody can call you a terrorist, that label can stick, and we've seen how widely the definition allows that term to be applied to almost anybody. Then you can be thrown into this route where it's very difficult to protect yourself. Really, it's very difficult to dislodge that, and that is fundamentally wrong because it undermines the rule of law. So how do we change that? Frankly, these laws have been brought in by politicians, either change the politicians or create such a circumstance that those politicians think it's not in their interest to engage in such policies. partly there are, because we're in a European country, there is redress outside of the national courts. The national courts are limited to a degree as to what they can do about the interpretation of legislation, but they can always be taken to the European courts as well, and that actually has happened, particularly for Section 44 of the Terrorism Act, which was deemed illegal and now no longer, in very limited circumstances, apply. But the backdoor way where this recourse is being mitigated is by governments cutting funding for lawyers to take cases to the European courts, and so unless you have a spare £200,000 in your back pocket, then the law will not be affordable for you. So we may need to think about, as a community, the private financing or charitable financing of court cases that are brought on the basis of redressing the balance.
Thank you. I think there were quite a few questions to Superintendent Kilpeläinen. As any advisor, Evwaraye, or maybe you want to address them.
Okay, thank you for the questions. If I start with the questions about the resources that Finnish police is using, investigating different kind of terrorist issues. We come actually back to the basics. It's about the definition of terrorism. When the Finnish police investigates or make the intelligence operations targeting the terrorist offenses, in many cases it's targeting the individuals who are somehow related to terrorist organizations abroad or maybe here in Finland. So we don't make a difference, is it the Hamas, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, whatever. So it's based on the suspects and what he or she does. Our main focus is to prevent that there won't be any terrorist attacks here in Finland. So our mandate is to investigate the operations and individuals who are here in Finland, but of course we have to monitor situation and these risk individuals who travel abroad and when they return might potentially be a risk person here in Finland. So one addition, if we look the Europol's terrorist trend report, actually in the EU member states, most of the terrorist offenses were committed by the separatist terrorist organizations. So when we talk about the terrorists, we can't talk only about the radical Islamists or Muslims, whatever. So many committed crimes are done by other people. About the money transfers abroad or sending money, according to my understanding of Islam, which is actually really limited, I think that you have to send money to your relatives, your family who might be living abroad, and that's what you have to do, and it's okay. And what I suggest for you is that always, when it's possible, use all the legal channels. We have different kind of NGOs and systems that are able to send money abroad, and then they all also know where the money goes. It hopefully goes to the right organizations, entities, and individuals. But of course, from the police point of view, it's a little bit suspicious if you collect money from each others in the dark parking lots and send it using cash couriers or whatever. Of course it's suspicious. But it's police job trying to find out and get the intelligence and evidence and find out, is this money going for the charity, for the legal purposes, or for illegal purposes. And I can say that it's really, really hard in many cases. Mr. Scheinin mentioned that this first pre-trial investigation in Finland was about $4,000, 3,000 euros. There were a lot of more money transfers abroad, but only this amount of money was something that the court decided went for the terrorist purposes. So always when it's possible, use the legal channels, use the charity associations and these kind of things So then you won't be suspected of financing of terrorism. Okay.
Sorry, if I could ask a question. So you're a police officer, not a politician, is that right? I think the question actually was how much of your resource. Sorry, yeah. I think the question actually was how much of the resources of Super have been used to investigate individuals who've left Finland to join the IDF and whether they've actually committed war crimes. So could you put a dollar or a euro figure on that? Or time figure on that specific question, because I believe you might have forgotten that it was asked.
Yeah, actually, it's Supo's mandate is the investigate the terrorist crimes, and when we talk about the war crimes, it's the National Bureau of Investigation who is in charge of these kind of investigations. And I think at least some of you might know that we have also investigated war crimes here in Finland. Actually, for example, the Rwanda cases and other cases. So crimes against the humanity and genocide and these kind of things. I don't have the figures. What are the how much percentage Supo is focusing on different kind of actions? So I'm not able to answer that. So.
Thank you. There was one question that specifically stuck to mind. I obviously am not in a position to answer regarding police activities since I don't work with that per se. But the excellent question was by, I believe, the young lady there in back. How do we identify someone as a terrorist? And I'm very happy to refer to Mr. Scheinin's definition and view on it. The quick answer is we don't. Well, that's a good response. It's something for the courts. For me, a terrorist is someone who's been found guilty of a terrorist offence in a court, and preferably perhaps a primary terrorist offence, by which I mean an actual act of violence. That brings me to perhaps the more elaborate answer of a terrorist being a legal definition and not working from a legal perspective. But I understand, of course, the notion where the question comes from. How do we target prevention and preventive activity? Our national policy is based on that violent extremism is defined by violence that is motivated by a set of thoughts, so to speak, be that religious, political, or other. For example, again, going back to the school shooter phenomena, there's also a set of thoughts, something called the school shooter cult, where there's certain patterns of behavior and certain ways of thinking, an element of radicalization. Quite simply, obviously, what would constitute a situation where preventive efforts, on an individual level, where preventive effort should be put in is where a person clearly speaks of condoning violence or actually planning to commit violence or some other very obvious sign. I think something we have to remember also is that prevention of something of violence in general, it doesn't require the certainty of the threat. So if I work within prevention on the grassroots level, if I'm a school teacher, for example, working with a pupil, I don't have to be certain of that individual at some point committing something. At the same time, though, what am I doing and what the nature of my work is obviously supporting the individual towards a non-violent way of functioning. So what I'm doing basically is doing my own job, working as a school teacher, working as a mental health professional, working as a social worker, within my own frame and within my own skill set in my own profession to support the elements that would make the individual refrain from violence. It's really fairly simple, but that's what it has to do with working towards the root causes of violence on the individual level.
Okay.
We're perhaps short on time. I'd like to answer the question of media, but...
Yeah, please. I think that's quite important, especially in regard to what's going on in Sweden at the moment and so on, and how the media reporting is running on that issue. But very shortly, if you may.
Very shortly. I think this has to do with, we have to be very careful as to acknowledge who is responsible for what. Obviously, we have a freedom of the media, and I think that a natural follow-up question is what are the possibilities for, say, a government, and what's the role of the government in the public discussion to provide information. I can assure you we do our best to provide a very general and a very objective picture of observations of what's happening in our society. Then what happens in the public discussion, what happens in the political discussion, what happens on the blogs is something that luckily is not controlled by the government, and that's something and a forum, I believe, that we all have to contribute in. We live in an age of Twitter, we live in an age of Facebook, we live in an age of all sorts of social media, video communication, where the official government message is only one message amongst others. 25 years ago, things were different. And again, also, I know amongst us we have professionals within the media, and also the media, the traditional media, so to speak, is only one actor forming the general understanding among people. So we live in a flood of information, and we can't really point a finger towards a specific direction. I guess my best personal response to everyone would be that we have to all be active in the public fora regarding these issues to bring forth a very objective picture. Let's not be silent.
Yeah, thank you, but let's be a bit silent and let Pia Jardi speak.
I would like to address about the issue of legal charity, because as my understanding, the brothers who were arrested, they did establish a legal charity organization in Finland, but then even though they are charged for terrorism. So this is also, we are a new community of Muslims here in Finland still. Of course we have the ancient Tatarian community, but when we talk the newcomers or converts, so we have still way to go to do also this kind of legal means for charities. We need to have also, I was asked from the Palestinian Forum chairwoman, she asked me that why not from Europe, especially also from Finland, you have like Muslim women organizations, that why not you come to make here charity work? We want you to come as a Muslim woman, to come to work with our Muslim women here. We have the Christian most of or other kind of organizations, but the Muslim organizations itself, they are not very visible in many places. So this is of course our task to do, but also for us to look that we should have right also to put the money to where we look that it is suitable. So this is how to establish these legal bodies for that's what I want.
Thank you. Timo, you had something still, I think.
Well, I could comment for Pia's statement that if you don't know what to do, call police. We are ready to discuss with you. We are here to help you and not your enemy. We are not investigating all you as a suspect. So we need a wide, large range of the cooperation and collaboration. In NBI, in the National Bureau of Investigation, is the Financial Intelligence Unit. They are experts of all kind of money transfers. So please be in contact with them. They can give you advice, and don't be afraid. About the media, I would also like to say that media, we all know that has a quite strong influence on public opinions and people's opinion. And I would also like to read more about the all 50 Somalis who have gone abroad to study medicine and come back to Finland and help us. So this is difficult. We know that terrorism is a very hot topic and it sells and so on. So we need, like Ari mentioned, we need different kind of voices to speak on different kind of media. So I also encourage you to make statements and create a different kind of public debate.
And luckily there are quite a few media representatives here among us today, and we hope that that message goes with you to your own working places. Now the time has run out, and we have been promised to continue a bit longer, but before we continue we have to say to Martin Scheinin goodbye, because his train is leaving. So thank you very much for being here.
before we can let you leave, we would like to give you a small present. And also, we thought that so that the other people wouldn't get jealous, we'll give their presents also now. Okay. First of all, thank you. My name's, by the way, Guled Ahmed, and I've been working with the university and with the guest speakers to make this event, and I have to say that thank you so much. You've been so helpful, and you've been amazing to work with you. And also from the behalf of our networks, here is the gift for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the gift and organizing the event. I have learned a lot from people who spoke. Unfortunately, there was enough time to hear everybody. Next time. Take care.
Your email will be full before you reach home.
Okay, the second person who's the most jealous at the moment, we can start. Ari looks like it, so we can start from you. You could get your gift from that side, and your hand shaking from this side. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then probably Tasnime, who's next, looking at me like that. Thank you so much. You've been amazing, and we hope to see you again here in Finland.
Inshallah, I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
And then Timo Kilpeläinen, I personally would like to call you, if there's something. So, thank you so much. Okay. And the last panelist, and also dear mother figure for us, of course, Pia Jardi. Thank you. And let's not forget one of the speakers that really had to prepare in a really tight schedule due to one of the speakers that's supposed to be coming from Cage here had to cancel. We're a bit worried about this situation because we haven't heard from him. So I would like to thank you, Anna, to give the speech with such short notice. Could you come here also? We have a gift for you. And then a person that really made this possible, that's sitting behind the sides of people and should get the credit for it. Sanna, could you please come here in the front also? Coordinator of the university. Thank you so much. I cannot. And of course, our moderator for the panel, and the person that kept it together, Reetta, would also like to thank you. And probably the person that did not guess this, I would like to also thank our chairman and spokesperson, Ali Hundarasifa. You might be wondering why did I want to give this. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'd also like to say that even though the subject here is a bit intense and serious, let's relax. Okay? That's all. Thank you.
What a wonderful break to get some presents. Because we were given some extra time, and I know that there are pressing questions because you are raising your hands and waving and jumping on your chairs, I will ask you to be very, very short in putting those questions, and I will give preference to those who did not have the chance to say yet anything. So please, you can start with your questions there. It's not on.
I have two questions. I'll be very brief. One thing is like what you can see, what you're not seeing in Denmark, that they have opened some kind of like rehabilitation center for the returnees from this area or like from the outside. So does Finland have any kind of that kind of plan? And the second thing I'd like to ask that. In Finland, are we seeing, from what Pia was talking about, are we seeing another Mozambique being made here? Like what you saw in UK, as many of our speakers said, that we are following UK footsteps. So in UK, this Mozambique, he was like detained for 7 months. And after 7 months, all his charges were like dropped for nothing. And he's now planning on to sue the government. So what are Finland's procedure in prevention of these kind of things, these flaws of the system? Thank you.
Thank you. You can give to your neighbor right away.
Thank you. I'd like to ask to all of the panel the question that everyone says about this terrorism, and terrorists. How many of you think that this word terror is actually a terror in everyone's mind? This has been created by media so that everyone should be afraid. Muslims should be afraid of Christians, Christians should be afraid of Muslims, and all these things should happen. And even if it is a terrorism, we see people get dragged out by the police, by the people in the government. They do every bad things with the people, and they don't call that a terrorism. And my second question would be about this charity. Islam says that we need to help poor. It doesn't say anywhere that we need to help only Muslims. So if we send the charity to maybe Iraq, Syria, or other places, we don't only send them to only Muslims, we send the people who are Christians over there as well, and the Jews over there as well, and the other gods as well. So if someone, like if tomorrow the government over here is not going to help the Christians or the other, if Muslims come out and they help them with the money, will you label us as a terrorist?
It's maybe a bit too difficult question here, but interesting. Yes, please.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. My name is Ahmed Tawheed. And I think if you heard the name of Tawheed, you might reply to myself as a terrorist. But Tawheed is just a nickname. My question is not to you, to the experts. My question and my advice is the audience, mostly to the young Muslims who are in here today. To me, terrorism is ideology. It's ideology created by a man. Let the leader of the ideology be the former president of America, George Bush. Let me be him. Let me be the Blair. Let me another creations of terrorism. But a terrorism is ideology. It doesn't have to do with Islam. It doesn't have to do with Christianity. And it doesn't have to do with Jewish as well. So my advice is to the Muslims in here, not to the experts again. Just please find out the civilization of Islam. Learn about the foundation of those
who this was about questions, not question. Sorry.
I'm sorry. But my question,
so short question, and if you don't have any, then please give the microphone.
My advice is let us find out about the real Islamic civilization.
Yeah, let's not do it here, thank you, because we were now asking questions, so maybe there is another one who would, you can get to the... Yeah.
Thanks. I have two questions. One is maybe mostly to Mr. Kilpeläinen. What has been done concerning the CIA flights which were stopped or which were getting fuel in Finland? Has this been investigated as helping a terrorist organization or not? And secondly, to Mrs. Jardi, is it what you were saying concerning swimming amongst girls and boys not a question of labeling Muslims or not letting you be as you are, isn't that more a question how a minority lives within another majority? Because I would suppose if I go with my children to live in any Muslim country, they would not let my girls swim with boys, as if I would request it. And I would have to wear maybe a skirt, although not willingly. So is that rather a question how a believing Muslim can live in a rather Christian society or atheist society and still see its own rights fulfilled?
Thank you. You can give the microphone behind you, please. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Marian Abdulkarim. I'd like to make a quick comment. First of all, I have to answer your question. We are not talking about a Muslim country. We are Finnish Muslims living in Finland. And every time we discuss issues relating to our presence here, our human rights, the question comes up, what if I was in a Muslim country? Would this and this not happen to me? We're not here to discuss that because I'm a Finnish citizen and I talk from this perspective. My comment to Mr. Kilpeläinen, Evwaraye, you keep repeating we this and we that. And first of all, when it comes to the police, you cannot ask a minority to trust a governing police that is not condemning the racist actions within the police department. We are aware that there are racist figures within the police, some who have affiliations with non-fascist movement and so on, and there has been no condemnation regarding those. So if we are discussing minorities' trust when it comes to the governing police, for example, the institution which is highly revered in Finland, then we need to discuss openly, and dialogue can only happen when we are actually discussing what the issues are. You guys are talking from perspective of a theory. In theory, we're all equal. In theory, we have all those rights. In practice, when I leave the country, I'm asked certain questions, not asked the other passengers, because I happen to be black and wearing this scarf. I'm requested to answer, where am I going? What is my final destination? Am I possibly traveling out of Finland to go to a location where I'm not supposed to go? And that does not come from a place where I have shown any risk of terrorism. It comes from my appearance purely. If I were not wearing the hijab, if I were white, I would not be subjected to these questions. Also, random checks, like you get elected for random check, happens because we are looking different from the majority. So we can discuss the theories of law, what the Finnish law tells us, what rights we have in this society, but that is not what we are here, like, from my heart's perspective. It's not the theory that we're interested in, it's the practice. And how does the police, for example, protect our rights within the public space?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Here is the last question comes from here. And I'm deeply sorry that there are many hands, but life is as it is. It's not fair.
My question is regarding the superintendent. Sorry, everybody, that you take. Can you assure, you just mentioned a while ago that there are no laws in the pipeline that would represent the same as the UK. Can you assure that there's nothing coming in the future that would be able to basically follow up footsteps in the UK? And also, the sister just behind me mentioned about the hate crimes and about the police. Is there a hate crime law in Finland that would punish the perpetrators of such crime, whether it be the police or the public? Thank you.
Very provocative. Thank you. Now, I think you can pick up and choose those questions you feel competent to answer. And
yeah, I'll take up the one.
Yeah, take the microphone, please.
Sorry, yeah. I'll look at the question in terms of the media. The media has been spoken about a fair bit, and in most jurisdictions across Europe, internationally, the theory accepts that there's a limit to free speech. And usually that's at the point where somebody's offending somebody to such a degree that it's quite likely that they'd respond in a non-verbal way. For example, you can't just go out in public and start hooliganizing people, even though that's your free speech to. Now, one of the rules or laws that exist commonly is about incitement to racial or religious hatred. Some jurisdictions have religious, some not. And to my mind, there are good examples, particularly to do with the cartoon case of Mohammed. particularly to do with Jules Polland in Denmark, the newspaper that published cartoons of Prophet Muhammad, which was quite inflammatory. Now, to my mind, that would fall squarely within laws to do with incitement of racial or religious hatred, but they simply weren't applied. They simply weren't. And what we saw from that was a worldwide backlash in various different countries, which led to violence and violent reaction. So the issue isn't about the laws. The issue is about, as the sister over there said, the application of those fairly. If you don't have it, you don't have the rule of law. And those media outlets, yes, they're organisations, but they are also run by individuals, particularly editors, whose job it is to make an editorial choice between whether something is appropriate or not, and they should be held to account and responsible when it's clearly envisaged that what they're publishing is going to be inflammatory.
I quickly, of course, thank you, Mariam. You answered my question, but of course I want to still look the issue that, as I am also Finn, even born Finn, and I don't look my minority. I am Muslim. Finland gave me right to be Muslim, so I'm Finnish. But the issue is that. That's what Mariam told this one. That we always talk about the other countries. Why we have to build a mosque in Europe while in Saudi Arabia there is no mosque? Do you want to be in Finland to be that way? We are talking about democracy, that we are a democratic country, so we should have a right to everybody. But what I was talking impact to the children and people to hide their religious beliefs. So if somebody else, a Muslim, says that for me it's okay to swim with man or to do other things, for other it is a belief that I shouldn't do so. So you should also, it's not something that you should have to adjust. This is the issue. There are things where you can adjust, but there are things where you don't need to give up from your beliefs. So this is one of the issues, that how to get your rights in this country where we are lived to born our children. So it's not about being minority or so. This is one. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to comment some questions?
Yes, please. Quite a few questions, I believe. I perhaps hopefully picked up on most of them. Number one, rehab center for returnees like in Denmark. Currently what we have in place is a multidisciplinary approach on a local level. To be honest, it's fully functional only in Helsinki. It was referred to earlier here, that has to do with the anchor model, but there are not only plans but actions in place where this should be working nationwide in some time, hopefully already during this year, especially in the major cities. Comparing to Denmark isn't exactly the perfect fit from the perspective that, according to my understanding, people who are traveled from here to conflict areas, especially to Syria, are quite a diverse group of individuals. There are people who are born here, raised here. There are people who've been here for a very short time. There's younger people, there's older people. So the individual needs of someone returning from a conflict area vary quite a bit within this group of people. Have they been there for a long time? Have they been there with the family? And again, the response then should be very be based on the individual requirement. What was the reason the individual traveled in the first place? Was the idea to participate in a conflict? Is the person in such a mindset that they pose a threat to themselves or to their local community? Issue like these, do they have mental health questions? So there's not a clear one individual bill, but rather we're looking towards bettering cooperation. The key here is the personal willingness of the individual, but at the same time I believe this has to do with then the individual needing to trust the actors they're working with, needing to trust the social workers and the police and the other actors. And I'm not by any means disregarding what was brought up regarding trust towards police. Terrorism.
May I interrupt you because there's the organizer has the right to pose one follow-up question. Is you okay with that?
Yeah, I have a quick follow-up question related to this. I don't know if the mic is working, but have you included, for example, the Muslim community in the implementation, the planning and implementation of this sort of a program?
That's a good question. We've worked together, for example, with the Islamic Council, discussed on a general and strategic level. What the problem is regarding that is on individual level is privacy, mostly. When I said that individuals' different needs, and this has to do with this is what's very important, perhaps, to stress here. This is the same intervention, not mechanism, perhaps, but same intervention or support frame that is offered to someone suffering from or someone who's a potential school shooter, for example, someone who's violent in another scope. So this is not Muslim specific. This is not specific towards somebody traveling to a combat area, someone participating in armed combat somewhere else, but rather it's a general framework. So from that perspective, the answer would be no, but perhaps I elaborated on the reasons. But on a more general level, quite a bit of cooperation, obviously, and we wish for quite a bit more of cooperation because, like I said earlier, this is not something that's led by the government. Prevention of violent extremism and violence in society is not something that's led by the government. It's something that obviously the government has a great interest in, but it's something that we all contribute to. Moving on to the question of terrorism problems with the word, I think what today has demonstrated very well is that there's a lot of other bad things happening in the world. There's war crimes, there's violence in general, there's sexual crimes, there's human trafficking, a lot of abhorrent things happening all over the world. And I think that we have to be very focused on how we also use the word terrorism, who we call a terrorist. And I think through that also contribute to the public discussion and be very careful of using the terms of terrorism, and also be very clear on that we're referring to something in the legal frame rather than an individual or a community even. Racists within the police. From a very pragmatic standpoint, I believe there's racists in all professions, I think, and in all social settings. However, our tolerance towards racism within public officials obviously should be zero. People who hold power, who can use powers of society, should be very little, and at least a zero tolerance towards their possibilities of acting out on perhaps such beliefs. There are checks into this. There's cultural sensitivity training within the general police education. Very recently, and I have a colleague here representing the Ministry of the Interior, a project called Good Practice Plus regarding the police capability on identifying racist crime, obviously outside of the police, or not outside of the police, but in society in general, including within the police, has been commenced. It's a two-year EU-funded project. So this is something that's not being, how should I say, looked away from, but rather the need of extra sensitivity and understanding and control within this profession group has been recognized by the government. Regarding the check, if a situation would arise that if an individual feels that they've been treated in a racist way by a police officer, the mechanism is such that obviously I urge every single individual to file a report on that police officer. The mechanism is such that the investigative unit will be another unit, and the lead investigator will be from outside the police. It will be someone from within the prosecutor's office. And this pertains to all crimes committed by a police officer. So there's a system in place to ensure an impartial investigation. So it's not a colleague investigating their colleague if they're under suspicion of any crime, including racist crime. Obviously, this will be very serious. Hate crime laws, very briefly. Committing a crime towards another individual based on hate is an aggravating factor within the criminal code of Finland. So if, say, I would beat you up, and if it would be found that it's based on hate, mainly ethnicity, religion, such markers, I would be sentenced to a higher sentence because of the hate element of that, and this pertains to all forms of crime towards others.
Okay, sorry. We really have to leave the premises because people working for the university have to close the door behind us. So I only give you, Timo, 1 second to say something, if that's fine.
There was a question earlier about whether or not terrorism encompassed state terrorism to do with Iraq and Fallujah. And as I have a police officer sitting next to me, I'd like to report a terrorist conspiracy between Tony Blair and George Bush, the Commission of Terrorism across the world, if I could find that officially.
Yeah.
Do we know that?
Okay, thank you. Actually, I think that Ari covered quite many questions, but maybe a few words that about the possible new legislation regarding terrorist offences in Finland. It's under the competence of Ministry of Justice, but what I know is that there won't be any plans, at least in the near future. For example, these new laws that came from the beginning of this year, it was 5 or 6 years step to make these new proposals and for the parliament, so it's a long way anyway, so I think they will consider what they will do. About the CIA flights, it's out of my competence, but so I have to refer only what I have read from the media, and I think that in Finland they have done several investigations led by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I don't know are the reports public or not, but they have been investigated, but it's based on the media statements. When we talk about the starting pre-trial investigation of terrorist offences, we are talking about, like today, we are talking about really serious offences, really serious crimes, which might happen here in Finland or abroad. And even the law, Police Act, Criminal Investigation Act and Coercive Measures Act are the same, that we deal on the daily basis with the ordinary crimes. When we talk about the terrorist crimes, the threshold to start pre-trial investigation, it's much more higher. And there are several reasons for that. One is that, as we all know and have noticed in recent years also here in Finland, when somebody is investigated of terrorist offences, he or she will be stigmatized. We don't want to make these investigations public, but that will happen, we know it. And that's why police, when they start the pre-trial investigation, they have reason to doubt somebody has committed a terrorist offense. There must be several kind of many different information and intelligence. The investigation never starts off on single source information. Somebody comes and he or she is a terrorist, please do something. So they collect a lot of evidence before they start the pre-trial investigation.
Okay, thank you very much, and I really truly want to thank you, panelists, for bearing with us.